F0.95, probably the brightest lens in Micro Four Thirds system. Hi guys, my name is Karol and today I'm going to talk about a very special lens. This lens is Voigtlander 42.5mm with maximum aperture f0.95. Let's get it done. It is a prime lens with focal length 42.5mm, which is 85mm equivalent in terms of full format cameras. The angle of view is around 30 degrees, which makes it a great portrait lens. Minimum focus distance of this lens is around 23 cm, which gives macro ratio 1:4. The lens isn't small in terms of Micro Four Thirds system, but it isn't big either. It's 65mm tall with diameter 64mm. The lens uses 58mm front filters. Overall, this lens is much bigger than previously presented Panasonic 42.5mm with maximum aperture f1.7. If it comes to size comparison, I would rather compare this lens to my Olympus 12-40. However, Voigtlander lens is heavier. The lens weighs around 570 grams and it feels like a stone. Small, heavy and cold stone. It's really front heavy while mounted on a camera. Let's discuss build quality. The lens was released in 2013 and it was the fastest and the brightest lens from Micro Four Thirds system at that time. The entire construction of the lens is made of metal, including the mount. It's simply built like a tank. All parts of this lens are made with the highest precision in order to deliver possibly the best quality to the customer. The lens contains 11 glass elements in 8 groups, which are supported with 10 aperture blades. Aperture blades are really nicely made and it's true pleasure to watch them working. Voigtlander 42.5 is equipped with 2 rings. Close to the camera body you'll find focus ring. From 23 cm to infinity you have to turn the ring by 270 degrees. Then closer to the front of the lens you'll find aperture ring, which clicks nicely for each available f-stop. In addition, the lens has back and front grip, which helps to hold the lens while shooting or during installation to a camera. The lens is not weather resistant and it doesn't have any gasket on the mount. In addition, the lens mount doesn't have pins, which means it's fully manual lens. The Voigtlander lens has no image stabilizer, which means that you will have to rely on built-in camera stabilizer. If you will decide to purchase this lens, you will also receive lens hood, which is part of the package. It's time for my image quality test. I tested this lens for different aperture values. Let's see results. For maximum aperture f0.95, the lens isn't sharp at all. It is soft in the middle of the image and even softer in corners, including very heavy vignetting and purple fringing on the edges. What's more, the image has desaturated colors. Changing the aperture just by one click and the image has slightly improved sharpness in the middle, still suffers from strong vignetting. What I found pretty interesting, at maximum aperture the entire image has a shade of magenta, but when closing down the aperture, images get some green tones instead. During this test, white balance settings were exactly the same for all images. Problem with chromatic aberration and vignetting slowly disappear and is nearly not visible for f2.8. Sharpness in the middle of the image is nicely improved as well, but corners still seem to have touch of softness. The real improvement can be observed for aperture f4 and above. Sharpness in the middle and corners is very good and vignetting totally disappeared. The lens seems to have similar characteristics for f8. At f11 the lens seems to be a touch softer due to diffraction and it's even softer for f16. However, in both situations images are fully usable. It's time for a grid test and I performed this test about 5 times because I couldn't believe my results, and let's see why. For maximum aperture this lens has very strong vignetting, including aberrations in corners. In addition, the entire image has a shade of magenta color. You can also observe barrel distortions. Sides, including top and bottom lines, are curved. Closing down the aperture, the lens renders more saturated and neutral colors. Also, vignetting slowly disappears. The vignetting seems to be gone at f4. And again, the lens seems to have the best results between f4 up to f8. The main problem that I found with this test is chromatic aberration, which is quite constant for various apertures. It's slightly improved closing down the aperture, but it can be observed in corners even for f11 and f16. In my third test, I would like to keep focus on the strongest point of this lens, which is bokeh and low light capabilities. This short video was recorded without any additional source of light, except of street lights. For maximum aperture f0.95, the lens produces absolutely amazing bokeh, even for small micro four thirds system sensor. All light sources are turned into nicely looking tears or lifts. When you close down the aperture, the bokeh has decagonical shape. It has 10 angles due to 10 straight aperture blades. A lot of people accept only perfectly round bokeh, but actually I like this shape. When you look closely on the bokeh balls, it looks very smooth and clean, without onion effect. It's finally time to discuss pros and cons of this lens, and the first and most important thing is its low light capability. Although many imperfections, this lens allows to record nicely looking video or take pictures in really dark environment. There are very few lenses on micro four thirds market with aperture below f1.0 and acceptable optical performance. Secondly, build quality. This lens is built like a tank. At the same time, every single part of this lens has amazing quality. All rings work very precisely and smoothly and have very good grip. Another plus is functionality of focus ring. The focus ring on Voigtlander lens turns by 270 degrees. I think it's super useful, especially while focusing with large apertures where depth of field is extremely shallow. Such demanding situations require the best precision in focusing. This ring simply does the job very well. Point number 4 is glass brightness. This lens seems to be much brighter for the same aperture values than my Panasonic 42.5 f1.7. Here you can see comparison of images taken from a tripod for aperture f2.0 and the same white balance and exposure. Both pictures have very similar brightness. On the left side you can see picture taken with Panasonic lens with shutter speed 1/80th of the second, and on the right side you have equally bright picture taken with Voigtlander with shutter speed 1/25th on the second. In cinematography, brightness of a lens is defined by T parameter, which is combination of aperture and brightness of glass elements. The Voigtlander doesn't provide any information about T values, but it's definitely super bright. If it comes to advantages, I also have to mention bokeh. The lens renders really nicely looking bokeh for maximum aperture with unique characteristics while closing down the aperture. I actually really like these decagons. It's time for minuses, and first of all I have to mention chromatic aberrations for all apertures and interesting magenta colors at apertures f0.95. Secondly, another problem with this lens is strong vignetting and lack of sharpness for largest apertures. This lens isn't sharp at all until it reaches aperture f2.0. Third is the price for this lens. This lens is damn expensive. The lens is designed for mirrorless micro four thirds system, which is supposed to be smaller, lighter and cheaper than full format equivalents. The new lens cost about 1000 euro. That's more than a lot of full frame 85mm lenses, which normally have better sharpness for bright apertures and have built-in AF system. Then another problem with this lens can be lack of weather resistance and sealing, which simply means that you will have to be very careful while shooting during bad weather conditions. And the last minor disadvantage is the lens weight. Micro four thirds gear used to be small and lightweight, but this lens is definitely front heavy while mounted on the camera. However, most likely you will have to keep the camera in both hands, since all adjustments have to be done manually. Finally, it's time for my own opinion about the lens, but first of all I would like to say special thanks for guys from Stavanger Photo who was kind enough to let me test this lens for last 2 weeks. This is one of my favorite photo shops with really nice and experienced personnel, so if you live in Norway or you plan to visit Stavanger area, you should definitely visit their shop. You can find a link in the description below. So overall it was absolute pleasure to use this lens. Although the lens isn't clinically sharp for maximum apertures, it allows to take clean shots with amazing bokeh. It will be definitely super useful for photographers and video makers which need to perform well in low light environment, like for example night events or wedding ceremony in a church. Additional blur at maximum aperture Adds nice cinematic feeling on videos. It's full manual lens, which is real pleasure to use. I'm just wondering if there is anyone who doesn't like to look inside the lens to observe movement of aperture blades. It's definitely one of the reasons why I really like manual lenses. I think it's a kind of addiction. And now the main question is, who's supposed to buy this expensive lens? The Voigtlander 42.5mm is definitely dedicated for a niche, for a group of people which require extremely bright glass. I found some information that the lens achieves t-value around 1.2 for aperture F0.95, which is absolutely amazing performance. I think it's the main and only reason to purchase this lens. If you plan to shoot with aperture values above f1.8, I would rather stick to much cheaper offers from Panasonic and Olympus. If you've ever had an option to use this lens, definitely let me know down in comments what's your opinion about it. I hope you found this video informative and useful. If you do, definitely leave some like and subscribe my YouTube channel. That's it for today. Thanks for watching and see you next time.